Hi guys, so a quick disclaimer before we get into it. There will be some spoilers today, but I'm not going to reveal who the killer turns out to be. So if you haven't seen Nightmare Beach, I think you're pretty safe to watch this review. So we're moving to the late 1980s for this one, albeit we're staying with Italian cinema, which I've covered a lot of recently. Although this is only barely an Italian film. It's set in Miami and it features quite a lot of American actors, so it's more a kind of Italian-American hybrid production, I would say. I guess you'd call it a giallo film, but it also feels like a slasher film to me in many respects. I can't always distinguish between giallo and slasher, although I guess because you don't find out the killer's identity until the end of this film, I'd probably swing more towards giallo. But certainly giallo and slasher are very close bedfellows in the world of horror. Like, if they were states of America, they would have to be side by side in the same portion of the map. They would be like California and Arizona, whereas if you've got something like elevated horror, that would be over on the rainy East Coast somewhere. What a silly scenario. Let's just move on. Now, the director of this is Umberto Lenzi. He's got a massive body of work, although I've not really checked out any of it. I did watch Cannibal Ferox a long time ago, and I didn't like that, but thankfully Lenzi has softened considerably by the time he did Nightmare Beach. And he also did a film called Spasmo a long time ago, which somebody recommended in the comments quite recently. I'm sure they did. But in terms of Nightmare Beach, there's a little bit of a mystery actually as to whether Lenzi directed it or whether it was a guy called Harry Fitzpatrick. Neither one of them seems to tell the same story about who did what, so I guess we'd call it a 50-50 sort of co-direct between Lenzi and Fitzpatrick. It's a bit bizarre that Lenzi seemingly doesn't want his name on this film. If he doesn't think this is very good, then the rest of his work must be amazing, because I really enjoyed Nightmare Beach. The setting here is spring break in Miami. There are hundreds of revelers and partygoers all drinking and screwing and carrying on, having a great time all week long, except for the people who are dying at the hands of the psychopath. Now, I love the way that they've outfitted the killer in this. He's dressed in all black leathers. He's got a motorcycle helmet, and his MO is super cool. He kills people by electrocution, various different means. I would say that 75% of the kills in this film are done by some form of electrocution, but I like how motorbikes and electrocution have got nothing to do with each other. They've just mixed these two things together to create a killer. It's like if you had a fireman as a killer, but he was going around killing people with a samurai sword. You'd be like, how would you even think to mix those two things together? But I like that sort of thing. And I liked the contrast between the killer's motorcycle outfit and Miami itself, because these clothes that this guy's wearing, they're all completely black for the most part, but the backdrop is this really colourful city, golden sands and blue skies. It works really well, much better than if this killer had been placed in, say, the dark streets of New York City. Now, I didn't guess the identity of the killer the first time I watched this film, because I saw it quite a few years ago. It might have been before the channel was even invented at that point. But I remember thinking that the reveal of the killer was a little bit disappointing to me. But this time around, watching it years later and knowing who the killer was among the crowd, I found it a lot more effective. It really worked for me this time. So I wonder if you end up watching the film twice, you might have the same experience where you feel a little bit underwhelmed when you first see who it is, and then eventually you'll sort of come around to it. This movie has an interesting structure in terms of how it treats its characters, because I'd say there are 10 or 12 principal characters who are potential victims for the killer, but they don't always cross paths. A lot of them never meet each other. They just sort of have their own little subplots and then either die or just leave the movie completely. A lot of the times in a movie like this, where somebody's going around killing people, all the potential victims will be part of the same group, or they'll at least know each other. But that doesn't happen in this. We just get all these different viewpoints of people who never meet, and I just found it to be an interesting approach. And some of my favourite characters in this film are people who Never meet any of the other characters. So there's this one guy, he's like a practical joker. He's like Shelley from Friday Part 3. One of his earliest scenes, he pretends to die in a swimming pool. He's even got some fake blood. He's like, and he makes all these women nearby scream. And then he's like, just kidding. And then a few other times in the movie, he comes out with some other practical jokes that the people around him just can't stand. But even better than this guy, there's this woman who is like a call girl. She's sleeping with wealthy guys and in her hotel room. But I got the impression with this woman that she's not actually a call girl normally. She just seems a little bit too clean cut. I kind of guessed that maybe she's from somewhere other than Miami, and she's just randomly decided to make a killing for this 1 week only by sleeping with wealthy guys. And I just loved the fact that she's really into it. Like, she's just really bubbly and happy about it. She's not a reluctant hooker. Some of these guys look really disgusting, and yet she's still just playing along with it in a really merry way. She's not acting disgusted at all. And she's got this little role play set up where she pretends to be like a medical student who desperately needs money for the bills or something. And these guys she meets are going along with the role play, but even after the sex, they're still doing the role play. You'd think that once the sex has happened, then they'll just ditch all this crap and just start talking to each other normally, but no, it doesn't happen. But I really liked this character, and I would have preferred it actually if this call girl had become like the main final girl. Why not? Why not have like a prostitute ending up being the main character of the movie? I mean, Pretty Woman from around about the same time period. Julia Roberts was playing a prostitute, right? She was like a famous main character everybody loved. Why not do it as well in this sleazy seaside giallo film? Why not? Because the main girl that we get here is boring as hell. She's called Sarah Buxton, the actress's name, but her character is just so dull. She's working in a bar in Miami. She's got this glum look on her face. The main final boy of the film is not much better. You've got like hundreds of people in this area enjoying spring break, and there's only two people among everybody who looks like they don't want to be there. And those just happen to be the two people who end up being the main characters. So it definitely feels like when this was made, late 1980s, we were still playing along with this slasher trope where the main characters are going to be whiter than white, and they're not always going to be that exciting. A bit like Laurie Strode, I guess. They're a bit kind of reserved, and they don't really like to have fun very much. But I found that to be a little bit of a frustrating thing about this movie, that they don't take full advantage of the really happy, bubbly characters. There's a bunch of bikers in this who really don't like the fact that the spring breakers are in town, so they're just trying to beat people up at any opportunity, seemingly. They've got the word demons written on the back of their denim jackets. I guess that's the name of the gang. But the colouring of the letters is yellow, just like the title of the film Demons from like 85, and the font looks kind of similar as well. I could be wrong, but I was just totally reminded of the film Demons by just the way that it's written on the back of these denim jackets. And I just wonder if this is like a little Easter egg. It's the filmmaker's way of saying, well, we're Italian filmmakers, but a few years ago there were a bunch of other Italian filmmakers who made this really famous, cool film called Demons, and I guess this is our way of having a little nod at that film and the success of it. Maybe, who knows? There's a really stupid scene, though, involving the bikers in this. So they've got this one woman among their number who they use as bait to lure certain men into traps. So this woman, she chats this guy up and then lures him towards an alleyway entrance, at which point she turns around and she's like, ha ha, and all these bikers just come out and beat this guy up. But if you look at the geography of the scene, when this girl chats this guy up originally, they barely walk about 10 yards to get to the mouth of this alleyway. So it's like, this ruse was kind of pointless. If you really study the scene, you'll see what I mean. But anyway, it is what it is. One thing about all this is that it's not really that scary. I'm a horror purist. I like to be creeped out at least a little bit in any horror movie I'm watching. It doesn't even have to be much. Just give me a little bit of that creeped out feeling that I'm looking for in your 90-minute movie, but that doesn't really happen in this, and yet it's still massively entertaining. I'm enjoying this all the way through when I'm watching it. It's a hell of a lot of fun. I saw one review which described it as a horror comedy. I wouldn't go that far. There's not enough in it that is funny. It's more of a fun horror film than a comedy horror film, I'd say, but certainly not scary. And yet the worst thing about it is the music, which is really bland all the way through. There's a lot of rock music type stuff, but none of it's any good. And even when there's this massive concert going on, the music's still rubbish, even in that scene, which is unforgivable. But even worse, the music carries on playing over the kills, which is just a weird choice to me. I probably didn't notice at first, because the first kill especially is so good that your brain's just not going to be thinking about the music. And I'm referring to the kill where this girl gets fried on the back of the killer's motorbike, which is just so insanely good. It reminded me of the kills from the film Death Proof somehow. But by the time you get to, say, the elevator kill, which must be about halfway through the film, the music playing on the kills is starting to get on my nerves by this point. Literally, I just want to shout stop at the scream. I'm like Tom Atkins in Season of the Witch. I'm like, turn it off, turn it off! I wasn't actually doing that, because my wife usually sits in the corner when I'm watching horror films, doing her own hobbies, and she'd get really freaked out if I started shouting at the screen. But the point still stands. I don't like the music in this film, but I want to finish with a positive, and that would be that the crowds that are used in this is a real asset to the movie. And it always seems to me that even large, big budget horror movies struggle to do crowds for whatever reason, presumably cost. But even horror franchises that you would think would have a bit of money behind them struggle to do this one thing. Like Scream 6, for example, a couple of years ago, it was shot in Canada, but it was meant to be New York City, and yet I never got the vibe of any kind of major metropolitan area in that film. It all felt kind of put on. And then you've got Friday the 13th Part 8, which made a big deal of how expensive those 10 minutes in Manhattan Square were. Fair enough, maybe they were, but still, it just shows the problem that horror movies can have sometimes. And then you've got Halloween 6, which has this massive party in the middle of Haddonfield, and yet you never see it. You just see the DJ at the front. You never see any of the crowd. They just went super cheap on that. But this film, Nightmare Beach, has got some cracking footage of people everywhere, swarms of people, and none of it's like CGI or anything like that. I reckon that there was an actual sort of spring break going on wherever they filmed this. It might not necessarily be Miami. And they've just managed to get some cracking footage, but that really adds to this film. It's a real bonus of this film. Overall, I really like it. I saw it years ago. Always felt that one day I would come back to it, and I just randomly spotted it the other night and put it on, and I would definitely recommend it if you haven't seen it. If you're into slasher films, giallo films, this one has got quite a unique feeling to me. It's very memorable. We've reached that point where I might feel inclined to show you a physical media copy of Nightmare Beach. It's just that I don't actually own it. I have seen copies on eBay, though I'm sure I have, for like £12 or £13 maybe. I watched it on Amazon Prime. If you have a subscription to that, then it's currently available for free. Right, so let's get to the bag of terror and find out how I'm going to score this. So we've got 1, 2... 3 and 4 bloody axes out of 5. Now I'm switching to carving knives once I get to 1,000 subscribers. I'm currently on 996. Every time I do a video now, I keep thinking that it might be the last video with the axes, and that makes me kind of sad. I mean, me and these axes, we've been through a lot together over the years. I am going to miss them, believe it or not. But there we go. Right, let's have a quick reading update before we wrap up. I'm currently working my way through the Bachman books, which is an anthology featuring 3 novels in the same volume. So you get The Long Walk, Roadwork and The Running Man. In the last review I did, I talked about The Long Walk, which is a 5 out of 5 book for me. Absolutely loved it. I've now finished Roadwork. I'd give this one 4 out of 5, so still extremely good. This one is about a guy who becomes really depressed because he realises that they're going to build a new road that's going to go through his neighbourhood. They're going to need to knock down his house and all the houses on his street. and by pure coincidence they're also going to have to knock down his place of work, which is like a few miles away. So he's been really unlucky, but he just can't cope with it. So he starts falling into a complete black hole mentally. He buys loads of weapons and explosives, and all the people around him just don't want to be near him anymore. It's quite bleak, this story, and yet still a lot of fun. I loved all the random characters that this guy Bart meets throughout the story, especially Olivia. She was a super character, and I just really liked this. So it's another solid entry by Stephen King, and I am now moving on to The Running Man. I know I'm reading a lot at the moment because I seem to be having a reading update with every single review, whereas when I was reading Cujo back in December, I think I went through an entire month without doing a reading update in the videos. But we are in a good patch with Stephen King. I'm really enjoying these Batman books, so we shall see if it continues with The Running Man. Actually, I know it will, because I've read The Running Man before many, many years ago, and it's pretty good from what I can recall. Right, we'll leave it there for today. Thank you for joining me for my review of Nightmare Beach, and I'll be back very soon. Until then, bye-bye for now.